Hi and welcome back. We are ready to go into some more organelles. So far we've talked about the nucleus, which houses all the genetic material for the cell, has a beautiful double phospholipid bilayer for its nuclear membrane, or envelope as we say. And we've also talked about the ribosome, which is our organelle that doesn't happen to have a membrane around it, one of the onlys that doesn't have a membrane on it. Their job is to make protein, and they reside in both prokaryotes and eukaryotes. Bacteria need protein too, so got to give them a ribosome. The difference between the two different ribosomes that we have in our cells, we have bound and free ribosomes. So now we are ready to move forward with some more organelles. So going back to your notes, this is going to be big letter C. A was nucleus, B was ribosomes. Here we go. C is mitochondria. Mitochondria. You may have heard about this lovely organelle. Sometimes people call it the powerhouse of the cell, and it is kind of the powerhouse of the cell. This is the reason we call it the powerhouse of the cell. It helps convert all the food energy, the energy you get from your food, into chemical energy that the cell can use. Now, if you remember back in our last section, the chemical energy we were using to do the sodium-potassium pump, do you remember what that energy source was? It has 3 letters, ATP. So what the mitochondria does, it takes all the food, it acquires the nutrients, the foods, the macromolecules you eat, helps us convert that food energy into chemical energy that the cell can use. So converts food energy into cellular chemical energy. Otherwise known as ATP. All right. Now, if I'm looking at a cell, here's my nucleus. Got my DNA in there. Not the best pictures of DNA, but that works. Outside the cell, you'll see these cute little, outside the nucleus, you'll see these cute little bean-like structures kind of floating around. Now, if we were to focus on one of those little beans, here's what it would look like. And if I were to cut that bean in half so you could see just like kind of cross-section wise, here's what you would see. It has an outer membrane made of a phospholipid bilayer, but it also has this little guy on the inside too. It has an inner membrane, also made of a phospholipid bilayer. And the space between the inner membrane and the outer membrane is called the inner membrane space. Makes sense. And the inside space inside the inner membrane is called the matrix. Okay, here's what's super neat about the mitochondria. Not only is it, we're going to dive deep into the mitochondria in our next section when we talk about energy. We need to talk about how cells make energy and use energy. And this is where we're going to be camping out in the next section. So I don't want to go too deep right now into the mitochondria. I want to reserve a little bit of fun for next time. But a few things you need to know about the mitochondria. And this is going to be number 1 under C. I'm just going to put it over here right now. So the first thing about a mitochondria is that they have the ability to divide independently of the cell. So if I have one cell and I need to turn that into 2 cells, this cell is going to copy everything it needs so it can make 2, right? This mitochondria doesn't care if this cell is dividing or not. If it realizes, hey, I need more mitochondria so I could get more energy for the cell, I'm just going to divide myself and just start filling this cell up with mitochondria if need be. So it can divide independently of the cell. And here's what's really neat. So if you're an athlete, or I'm not, so if you ever, but I do like to run. And when I first started running, it really, really, really hurt. Especially if you start lifting weights, you start running, you feel the lactic acid in your muscles. You feel that tight, almost painful feeling in your muscles. You know something is going on. You worked out. If you keep working out over time and just do the same routine and even push yourself further and further, it doesn't hurt that bad anymore. And here's why. Because your body is responding to your exercise. It's specifically, the cells, your muscle cells, are realizing, okay, you're not stopping this exercise routine of yours, you're keeping it going, so we might as well adapt to your new lifestyle. And in order for you to maintain the energy requirements you need to maintain this new lifestyle, we need to start making more of this guy. So your muscle cells will start creating more mitochondria to give you the energy you need to do the job you want to do. It takes time to train those cells to start realizing, all right, she's serious about this workout. Let's keep making some mitochondria so we don't cramp and get muscle strain and pains and all of that going on at the same time. And it's just super neat that our bodies can respond and actually help us get to where we need to go, literally, by giving us more ATP. So the cell can divide, or the mitochondria can divide independently of the cell, and there's a few reasons why it can do that. One of the reasons why it's able to divide independently of the cell is the mitochondria is special. It has its own DNA and its own ribosomes. So has its own DNA, and the DNA is circular, not linear, and its own ribosomes. And the DNA and the ribosomes for a mitochondria reside in the matrix. So these cute little circular things, this would be the DNA, and dots, that would be your ribosome. What else has circular DNA? Prokaryotes. So this is when, if you want to ever dive deep into a really cool theory called endosymbiotic theory, the thought is that a eukaryote and a prokaryote basically melded together. I'm really simplifying the theory. And this mitochondria is sort of prokaryotic. And what we've done, this is what the theory says, what we've done is we've kind of we ate up this, mitochondria, and it gave us energy in the form of ATP, and we gave it food. So it was just a beautiful symbiotic relationship. So there was no need to kick it out or turn it off. And we actually worked well together. So mitochondria has its own DNA. That DNA basically gets used to make protein with the ribosomes inside of it. And these ribosomes have the same shape and size, if you will, as a prokaryote as well. These ribosomes don't match the ribosomes you would find in the cytosol. They're smaller, just like a bacteria would be. And so these DNA, there's 37 genes that reside inside the DNA that are responsible for keeping the mitochondria working and happy and doing its job. And there's if you ever decide to become a genetic counselor or mitochondrial specialist, there's a host of mitochondrial diseases because the mitochondrial DNA might be mutated that won't allow you to have a functional mitochondria. You can imagine if you don't have a functional mitochondria, you're not getting any energy and you can't do much. I mean, don't even think about walking. Think about everything else in your cell. Your sodium-potassium pump won't work that well. Little things like that allow you to live really well. So we need a functional mitochondria. So the mitochondrial DNA is super important for the health of the mitochondria. Super interesting. So mitochondria can divide on its own. mainly because it has its own DNA and its own ribosomes. It kind of does its own thing, and it responds to what you need it to do as well. If you decide to stop working out, you're gonna, the mitochondria that divided is just gonna recycle itself and just, they're gonna disappear. That's why that first workout after weeks of not working out hurts so badly, because you lost the mitochondria you gained over the time. Super interesting. I think that's all I want to say about the mitochondria for now. So, know that the mitochondria, the big job of the mitochondria is to convert food energy into cellular chemical energy in the form of ATP. Can divide independently on its own, has its own DNA, and its own ribosomes, all housed inside the matrix of the mitochondria. Okay, we have mitochondria. Now we're going to get into, when it comes to eukaryotic cells, animal cells have mitochondria, and actually everybody has mitochondria. This is one that we're going to talk about next. It's a little bit different. So here we go. Big letter D is a chloroplast. So this organelle chloroplast kind of does the opposite job of a mitochondria. But first of all, we don't have chloroplasts. Chloroplasts reside in all the other prokaryotic cells, have the ability to reside in all the other prokaryotic cells. I'm sorry, eukaryotic, forgive me, eukaryotic cells, except us. Plants have it, fungi have it, some protists have it. We don't. So we don't carry chloroplasts. All those other cells, not only do they carry chloroplasts, they also carry mitochondria. These are kind of like two sister organelles that work in the cell to work together beautifully together. But we don't carry chloroplasts. If we did, we would most likely all be green. So when we get to our energy lectures in the next section, we're going to talk about why they're green. And you can imagine now, oh, that makes sense. Plants are green. It's true, because plants are full of chloroplasts, and that chloro, the coloring, the pigment, it's all because of this. So a chloroplast is an organelle, obviously. Organelle, not in animals, only in plants and everybody else when it comes to the eukaryotic world. So organelle that converts light energy and water, that converts light energy and water into sugar and oxygen. O2. I should also put carbon dioxide as well. Carbon dioxide and water. You don't need to worry about that much detail yet. Next section you will. So you could, they actually do the exact opposite reaction that a mitochondria does. And these guys are very similar, they're very similar to mitochondria. So if you're looking at a typical plant cell, let's see if I could, yeah. So if you're looking at a typical plant cell, you have a cell wall, you have a cell membrane. Plant cells have cell walls. We talked about that with the cellulose back in the day. You have your cell membrane, your phospholipid bilayer. And if you're looking at this picture, you have a nucleus in here somewhere with all the DNA inside. And in here somewhere you're going to see another bean, and it has like these little lines inside. Here's what that is. This is the chloroplast. The chloroplast has an outer membrane, it has an inner membrane, and then within this inner membrane, this area, you have these stacks of little membranes that do all these specific functions inside the chloroplast. So you have your outer membrane, your inner membrane, and this little guy right here is called a thylakoid. which is also surrounded by a membrane. So you technically have 3 levels of membranes, because you have one membrane here, a second one, and a third one, and you have many of these guys on the inside. This stack is called a granum. We're going to get to all that later. But the other thing you need to know about how these guys work as well is that, like mitochondria, they can divide on their own because, you guessed it, they also have their own DNA and their own ribosomes. So I'm going to put this under number 1 over here. So like mitochondria, chloroplasts can divide on their own have their own DNA and ribosomes. You see how both the chloroplast and the mitochondria are just kind of independent of what's going on in, the rest of the cell. So these are present in plant cells, very present. These are abundant in plant cells. Mitochondria are also abundant in plant cells. We just don't have chloroplasts. Okay, so that's all I want you to know about the chloroplast right now. Next section, when we get to energy, we're going to be camping out at the mitochondria and the chloroplast. But don't worry about that yet. The main function of the chloroplast being an organelle that converts light, carbon dioxide, and water into sugar and oxygen, that's what I want you to know right now. And if you think about it, this sugar and oxygen gets taken up by the mitochondria to make energy. So they their food is sunlight, and that's how it all works. Granted, they need a little bit more than that. They need nutrition in the soil, but light is a big deal for plants for this reason alone. All right, last organelle before we take a break on our lectures, and this will be a short one. There's a big letter E. It's called the peroxisome. Give me a second and I'll write it out. The peroxisome. Big E. Peroxisome. So the peroxisome is just a tiny little organelle inside the cell. It's just a cute little round guy in there. Kind of gets overlooked oftentimes. But what the peroxisome what the job of the peroxisome is it transfers a hydrogen and an oxygen. It combines them essentially to produce hydrogen peroxide, H2O2. Hydrogen peroxide is severely toxic to the cell. So that's why the only spot we have hydrogen peroxide hanging out in our cells is in this tiny little compartment called the peroxisome. We're like, why in the world would we create something toxic? The job of that hydrogen peroxide is to help break down fats and detoxify different alcohols that come into the cell. And so that hydrogen peroxide feature allows you to break down fats, detoxify alcohols, and after that hydrogen peroxide gets used, it gets converted to water before it goes into the cell. Because the peroxisome just can't take the hydrogen peroxide forever, it has to convert it back to water so it can go out. So the other cool thing about the peroxisome, it can divide on its own again. So there's a few organelles that just kind of do their own thing, but they do it in response to the external stimuli that's going around them. So these guys combine hydrogen and oxygen to create hydrogen peroxide, H2O2, in order to detoxify alcohols and break down fats. All you need to know is that the hydrogen peroxide is converted to water before it leaves the peroxisome. So the peroxisome, if it's not going to leak and let all this hydrogen peroxide out in the cell, that would kill the cell. So in order for it not to kill where it's living, it's going to convert it to water before it leaves. That's where we're going to end right there. So we ended with, so far we've covered 5 organelles. Yes, we've done the nucleus, ribosome, mitochondria, chloroplast, and the peroxisome. These 5 organelles is what's important before we lead into the next group of organelles we're going to study. These 5 organelles are kind of independent of one another. They're not dependent on this organelle telling me what to do or whatever. They're a little bit more, we're just going to look around and see what needs to be done and do our job. So it's like the mitochondria. They're going to divide according to your workouts, stuff like that. They don't need anyone telling them to do that. They'll sense what's happening in the environment, and they will get those signals because of that. But they don't need another organelle saying, hey, you got to divide, we're working out. So that's kind of what I want you to think about with these first 5 organelles. They're slightly more independent. So now you can guess where I'm leading with the next batch of organelles. They actually are in communication and a little bit more dependent on each other. So come on back. We're going to get to these next group of organelles, and thank you.